Forgotten Archetype, Cosmo. First released in the set, Clash of Rebellion. The Cosmo archetype is based on a combined mix of both Wizard of Oz and Star Wars, as you can tell with some of the key monsters such as Cosmo Farm Girl, Cosmo Tin Man, and so forth. The Cosmo archetype focused on light and dark psychic and machine monsters that would use their effects to search for cards and banish themselves to summon other monsters out. The machine parts of the archetype were the main basics of the deck, and during their prime were sometimes even hard to get over, while the weaker psychic monsters would use their effects to search for cards. The machines would banish themselves to summon lower level cosmos from the deck, while the weaker psychics would be the engines to summon the machines from hand and or so forth. Some of the monsters had built-in defense such as Sidekick Witch, and some of the monsters had the potential to heal the player while also using life point effects for bonuses. The archetype saw major gameplay following its release in the along with the Kaiju archetype, but as of today, this archetype has seen seldom gameplay. What are your thoughts on the archetype, and what support should it receive in order to enter today's competitive meta? Ah, Jesus Christ. Forgotten Archetype, Landstar. First released in Labyrinth of Nightmare. This particular archetype, if it was one, was used by Joey Wheeler initially back then, mainly using the first one, Swordsman of Landstar, who was just a weak monster overall. This archetype received a card, Comrade Swordsman of Landstar, in Crossroads of Chaos, but it was just a mainly crappier version of the card, Command Knight. As for the rest of the cards, they were only used in the anime, they were still extremely weak cards. They were the following: Knight of Landstar, Grappler of Landstar, Brigadier of Landstar, Landstar Forces, and finally, Landstar Shot. And these cards all focused on these monsters being extremely weak to get buffer when they battled, and when they get destroyed or do something, get a benefit out of it. That aside, for this archetype to exist in the TCG, what are your thoughts on it? Forgotten Archetype, Ghost Trick. First released in the set, Shadow Spectre. The Ghost Trick archetype was a Halloween themed based archetype focused on putting cards face down and protecting the unknown, basically with hand trap effects and flip effect style effects, each with individuality. The level 1 of the archetype have effects in hand to set monsters from either side of the player's field and have abilities that trigger when destroyed or in battle. The level 2 monsters would focus on battle phase control effects to search for cards or to stall. And the level 3s of the archetype provided bonuses when played or flip face up. Some cards of the archetype saw play back then, as their hand trap effects weren't simple to stop, as the game back then used more spells and traps during the competitive play. The XYZ cards for the deck would be blended in with decks that use level 3 and level 1 monsters, for these cards were flexible in decks such as Ghost Trick Alucard and Ghost Trick Dolaran. As of now, there exists a Link monster for the archetype, but as a whole, the Ghost Trick archetype saw minor competitive play back then. What support should the archetype get in order to enter today's competitive meta? Forgotten Archetype, Trains.
I like trains.
First released in the set, Galactic Overlord, and used by Anna Kaboom in the Yu-Gi-Oh! XSaers series. This particular archetype focused on both level 4 and level 10 Earth Machine monsters that would exceed summon into huge monsters, with the exception of Leba, which was a rank 11 that you used rank 10 machines as material. Some cards were mixed in the archetype back then, such as Skypal's Gangaridai, and Exodius, the Ultimate Forbidden Lords, which could recycle graves, mill cards, and was also a level 10. Trains were a decent archetype that had top back then, with some variants that top were trains with Shaddolls, since the fusion monster Shekinaga was actually a level 10 Earth Machine monster. Infinite Track was another variant used with trains that topped, and lastly, Machina was another variant that topped as well with trains. As of now, the archetype is just there, with Leba and Gustav Max being the most popular cards of the archetype. What are your thoughts on the archetype, and what support should it receive to top now? Forgotten Archetype, Amazon. First released in the set, Labyrinth of Nightmare. This particular archetype is focused on female warrior monsters who held a variety of effects. Some gave cards attack power, some used traps to weaken opponents' monsters, and the rest varied. Originally, the card Amazon Archer was released not as an Amazoness, just purely Amazon. Despite that, the best Amazoness monsters used and abused back in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! Was Amazoness Swordswoman, a beatstick that punished the opponent's life points with any battle involving her. Best cards for the archetype are Amazoness Princess to search for spell or traps or for the archetype and can tag out one from the deck, Amazoness Onslaught to summon more during battle and banish opponent's monsters, and the Queen herself to prevent any of the others, including herself, from dying by battle. This archetype was only strong in Duel Links. In the TCG, this archetype has not seen much play for a long time. How should this archetype receive support to enter today's competitive meta, and what are your thoughts on the archetype? Forgotten archetype, Deskbot. First released in the set, Duelist Alliance. This particular archetype focuses on Earth Machine monsters in the form of desk materials that would pendulum summon and give other Deskbot stats and effects, and even summon other ones from other places. This archetype did see competitive play a few years ago following the release of the Pendulum monsters and the field card Deskbot base. The archetype was made up of monsters who gained stats as more came out, usually starting with similar stat points. The Pendulum monsters would abuse their effects on destruction or when they were Pendulum summoned. The main cards for the archetype are Deskbot 3, who would special summon any Deskbot from the deck, even had the quick effect that would buff any Deskbot including itself based on the number of other Deskbots out, and use machine duplication. As of now, this archetype is not being used at all for any competitive play. How should the archetype get support to return to the competitive scene, and what are your thoughts on the archetype? Forgotten archetype, Roids. First released in the set, Cybernetic Revolution. Roids are an extremely weak archetype used by the character XSaers in the GX series. The focus of these machines was to be fused for stronger fusion monsters that were never really good. The best monster of the archetype was actually Roids, who had the effect to auto-kill a monster in defense position with some decent attacking defense stats. That aside, the fusion monsters were more so just that. Mobile Base is a super defense monster with the ability to bring out other Roid monsters and bounce monsters to occupy their zones, while the fusion monster Stealth Fusion was the attack fusion of the archetype with the ability to swing at all monsters at the cost of your own Roid being equipped to it, and to have its attack during the fights, which is an extremely weak effect. The archetype has a structure deck that tactically featured Express Roid, but even with that, this is one archetype that never saw play at all. Thoughts on the archetype and what should it get to become competitive today? Forgotten archetype, XSaers. First released in the set, Ancient Prophecy. This particular archetype was decent on release with the ability to special summon monsters by having more out and able to synchro summon into powerful synchro monsters such as XSaers Hyunlei and the almighty XSaers Gothams. This particular archetype initially focused on special summoning and hand control, hence the effects from Gothams and Airbellum. As of now, there is a current deck out for being able to trash the opponent's hands as similar to the wind-up monsters, but with a twist. The best cards for the archetype were XSaers Fultro, XSaers Emmer's Blade, XSaers Hyunlei, XSaers Dark Soul, and the almighty XSaers Invoker, who was banned for a long time. As of now, though the archetype still has the discard combo, it has not seen much for competitive play in over a decade and has not received support in a while. What are your thoughts on the archetype, and what support should it receive in order to enter back into today's meta? Forgotten archetype, Klee. First released in the set, New Challengers. This particular archetype used to be a meta contender back in the day, with the potential of machine monsters that would pendulum summon, along with boosted tributes to summon boss monsters. Despite being locked into Klee summons, the archetype could boost the number of tributes for tribute summons, and it had huge boss monsters that were practically immune to cards whose rank/level were weaker than the monsters. Some of the best cards for the archetype were Kleefort Scout, Recreate, Sacrifice, Kleefort Helix, and lastly, the best Klee monster there was, Apocalypse Towers. Towers are so strong it was nerfed onto the balance that has been there for a while. Just the ability itself could force an opponent to get rid of a monster on hand or field, even those immune to monster effects. And if an opponent did not have a monster on field or hand, the opponent could reveal their hand to confirm what the opponent does, potentially granting knowledge and advantage over that player. As of now, Klees received a Link monster not that long ago, but despite that, the archetype sits unused and out of the meta. What are your thoughts on the archetype? Forgotten archetype, Silven. First released in the set, Legacy of the Valiant. This particular archetype was the innovator, the excavation, as it relied on plant monsters that would excavate the top cards of the deck and mill other plant monsters in order to gain advantage and to summon their boss monsters. Thanks to the archetype being plants, older plant support helped boost the archetype's potentials with cards like Lone Fire Blossom, Miracle Fertilizer, and a few more to add. The deck did see some competitive gameplay back then shortly its release, but the major success it held was only in Duel Links. The strongest cards for the archetype are Sylvan Charity and the two boss Exceed monsters, Aurea and Alcei. As of now, the archetype did get some mod support not long ago, but as of now, the archetype is no longer used as other plant variant decks are far better and more competitive, such as Traptrix and Sun Avalon. What are your thoughts on the archetype, and what support should it receive in order to enter today's competitive meta?